Neuroaffirming care is not about fixing anyone because fixing assumes that someone is broken. And I don't believe that any of us are broken. We're here to learn how to work with the wiring of each unique brain and nervous system, not against the wiring, not in spite of the wiring, but in collaboration with the wiring. Welcome to the Nervous System Care and Healing Podcast, where we talk about how to take care of ourselves in mind, in body, in spirit, while we navigate systems that were designed to keep us dysregulated. I'm your host, Liz, a neurodivergent therapist of color, and I'm really glad that you're here. Hey everyone. Today, I'm going to be talking about neurodiversity-affirming care. What it is, why it matters, and why it's helpful for everyone, even if you don't identify as neurodivergent. And if you need a breakdown of what it means to be neurodivergent, since it is a big term, go ahead and check out my second episode. That'll give you the foundation that you need to understand this episode. So as a therapist and coach, I'm really focused on providing care that is affirming and genuinely helpful for neurodivergent people, many of whom have not had positive experiences in healthcare. And for context, my work is about helping adults and couples to heal their nervous systems and connect with their authentic selves. The basic ideas I'm going to share here apply to all forms of care. So whether that is therapy, coaching, doula work, medical services, there is always space to bring in neurodiversity affirming care. And whether you are a practitioner or you're looking to receive care for yourself, I want to share these ideas because I think it's important for all of us to share this vision and framework of what a more inclusive and safer world would look like. And that world really begins with the care that we provide in relationships. There are a few basic principles of neurodiversity affirming care, or neuroaffirming care for short, and I've condensed it into 5 points. So we're going to go through the points, and the first one is that differences are not deficits. There is no one right way to be human. And neurodivergence, whether that's autism, ADHD, sensory processing differences, it is not the pathology that we've made it out to be. As affirming practitioners, we're not here to shame, judge, or pathologize people for being different. We are here to embrace differences as a valuable and actually essential part of human diversity, the fabric of society and community. Communities thrive when people come together with different skill sets, different ways of seeing the world. The only reason that differences are perceived as deficits in our current society is because our current society is structured to value people with neurotypical traits, people who can function well under capitalism. I'll share some examples here from the DSM, which stands for the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. This is widely used in Western healthcare to diagnose mental health conditions. So the DSM describes autism as autism spectrum disorder, ASD, and it lists out many different symptoms of autism. And we can already see here how the DSM is really leaning into pathology-based language, disorder, symptoms. These are not neutral terms. This is a choice. And I do want to note here that the contributors, the writers of the DSM, are a group of people that show significant gender disparities, meaning it's mostly men who contributed to this text. And many of the contributors also have financial ties to the pharmaceutical industry. I will link studies about that in the show notes. And I just want to name that because we really need to see how information we're getting about neurodiversity, like autism, it is not coming from a source that is representing the true diversity and depth of the human experience, the human population. And financial ties to the pharmaceutical industry give us some reason to question, why? Who benefits from framing autism as a pathology, as a disorder? So, I'll give you a taste of how the DSM describes autism in its own words. Here's a list of some of the symptoms. It includes insistence on sameness, inflexible adherence to routines, ritualized patterns of verbal/nonverbal behavior, deficits in developing, maintaining, and understanding relationships. Notice the word deficit here. Stereotyped or repetitive motor movements, and highly restricted, fixated interests that are abnormal in intensity or focus. Now, if I were to translate these symptoms into more neutral language, less pathology-based, and more curious toward difference, here's what it would sound like instead. Instead of calling it symptoms, I would just call it autistic traits. Traits include a preference for routines and familiarity, perhaps a preference for verbal or nonverbal communication, or a mix of both depending on the situation, different approaches to social situations and relationship building compared to neurotypical standards, tendency to stim, which involves repetitive movements that soothe the nervous system and release energy from the body, and special interests, highly focused interests or hobbies that bring joy and meaning to autistic people's lives. That's my reframe. So just notice how that feels, how different it is from the language of the DSM. In my reframe, I'm not assuming that differences are deficits or something that warrants judgment or criticism. I'm just acknowledging that differences are differences. With neuroaffirming care, it's really an invitation to imagine a world where we value people beyond somewhat arbitrary standards of how productive they can be under capitalism, how normal they seem, how socially acceptable they are. And instead, we're invited to remember that every human being is valuable. Every human life is worthy exactly as it is, and that there are many different ways to exist in this world. There is no one right way. Let's move on to the second principle of neuroaffirming care, which is that we acknowledge strengths and challenges. This is the both and energy. It is the nuance of multiple things can be true at once, because while there's nothing wrong with being different, as we discussed in point number 1, I also don't want to diminish the very real challenges and systemic barriers that neurodivergent people face. I've noticed that neurodivergence is often talked about in one of two ways. Either it's a superpower or it's a tragedy. So either, right, my autism makes me a savant who's going to save the world, or it is a total shame and it's going to ruin my whole life. That's kind of how the narrative goes. It's very black and white. And I am exaggerating a bit here, but that black and white either or perspective is very real. And I want to be clear here that every neurotype, neurodivergent and neurotypical, comes with strengths and challenges. And every individual is going to have their own process of unpacking that, navigating their neurotype, and figuring out how to work with the strengths and the challenges. I don't want to sugarcoat anything and say that everything is beautiful and great with being neurodivergent, but it's equally important that we not pathologize the neurodivergent experience, that we not assume deficit. So just to give a little example, for me, as a highly sensitive and autistic person, I really like that my sensitivity allows me to connect deeply with animals, with plants, and with other humans. That feels like one of my strengths. But one challenge is the flip side of that. Because of my sensitivity, my nervous system can get very overloaded very quickly. And I've had to learn how to manage my sensory experience, limit the input, limit the stimulation I'm taking in, and take measures to prevent burnout. So that is one of the challenges that I experience. All right, so the next pillar, the third pillar of neuroaffirming care, is that we aim to support the whole person, not to fix them. Here's what I mean by that. As neurodivergent people, any people, we need support, validation, and space to be our authentic selves. Everyone needs that. What we don't need is conversion therapy that forces us to become more neurotypical, that coerces us to mask all the time. Because forcing someone to be someone they're not forcing them to mask against their will has deeply negative impacts on mental health, physical health, and in my perspective, it is a type of soul harm as well. It hurts the soul. And neuroaffirming care is really about asking the individual, what do you need? Not what do I think you need to fix yourself, but what would you need to feel safe, to feel supported and cared for? And really trusting and following their lead, because every person is the expert of their own experience because they live inside their own nervous system. As practitioners, we need to allow autonomy for each individual to decide what feels right to them. And when we give that space for autonomy and choice, that can be healing in and of itself, because a lot of neurodivergent folks haven't really gotten to exercise their autonomy or have a say in their own care. Now, there's a bit of nuance here that I want to speak to. So, in the event that a neurodivergent person wants to learn specific skills, like how to socialize in neurotypical settings more comfortably, or how to prepare for a job interview that is almost definitely going to be based on neurotypical and capitalistic standards that don't come naturally to them, then maybe it would be that individual's choice to learn those skills. In order for this to be an affirming situation, it would have to genuinely be their choice, made with autonomy. And that would be different than being forced to mask. My point is that each individual has the right to decide what they need and in what way they want to meet that need. The fourth pillar of neuroaffirming care, we acknowledge that the world was not built for all people, and we incorporate that understanding into the care that we provide. Neuroaffirming care is, as we've said, not about fixing anyone, because fixing assumes that someone is broken. And I don't believe that any of us are broken. Instead, we're here to learn how to work with the wiring of each unique brain and nervous system, not against the wiring, not in spite of the wiring, but in collaboration with the wiring. We are aiming to meet the level of support that each individual needs, whether they have high support needs or low support needs, or somewhere in between, and that can change from day to day as well. We are not saying that there's a problem, and the problem is in this person's brain. If we just fix their brain, there will be no more issues. We are not saying that, because in a lot of cases, challenges and so-called issues are really caused by a mismatch between an individual's brain and the external environment. So here's one example. Imagine a person who is autistic and ADHD, in ADHD. They might struggle with transitions and task switching. On a given day, they might need to do multiple transitions, from sleeping to waking up, to then making breakfast, to getting in the car and driving to work. And then they have to answer emails, they have to sit in meetings and make small talk, and then they are driving back home, they're trying to decompress, make dinner, and then relax enough to fall asleep at a decent hour and do it all over again the next day. I know this type of daily grind is familiar for a lot of us. Each transition between tasks requires energy, requires bandwidth, and it might feel really overwhelming, this whiplash of all these tasks and transitions in one day, especially if their brain is wired to actually hyper-focus, if their brain prefers to stay with one thing for a long period of time rather than jump from one thing to another. Now, I think about how this challenge of task switching could be alleviated, wouldn't feel so challenging, if this individual weren't required to do so many tasks in such a specific way, because maybe their brain would function best if they didn't have random meetings and small talk disrupting their flow and interrupting their focus in the middle of the day. Maybe they'd benefit from the option to work from home sometimes and not have to commute or be in person all the time. Maybe they would thrive better in an environment where they're allowed to wear noise-canceling headphones or to step out of or opt out of in-person meetings if they don't have the capacity to be there, right? So we see here how there can be this mismatch between the expectations of the environment, in this case, a 9-to-5 work setting, and an individual's brain and nervous system wiring. And if this individual had access to more accommodating environments, maybe some of their challenges would be alleviated as well. With neuroaffirming care, we really try not to get stuck in the microscope lens of looking just at the individual and believing the problem originates within them. And instead, we zoom out and actually look at the whole context and the bigger picture. So the fifth and final pillar of neuroaffirming care is that we move at the speed of your brain and your nervous system, not faster, not slower. Everyone has their own processing style. Some brains process information quickly, rapid fire. Some brains need more time to digest. Some people are visual learners and they do well with images and graphs and reading words. Others are auditory and need to hear things explained verbally or talk it out in a live conversation. Some people need to move their bodies and stim a lot in order to stay regulated and present. Some people like to sit still. Some people can visualize images in their mind. Others can smell colors or feel the temperature of an emotion, just to give some examples. Some people feel sensations in their body, like, oh yeah, my stomach is tense right now. Others can sense energies in the room. And some people are verbal processors, while some are nonverbal. The point here is that neuroaffirming care meets each individual at their processing style and at their speed. As practitioners, we do not rush people to process faster than their nervous system can tolerate. We don't pressure them to share more than they're comfortable sharing right now, or to go deeper than what they feel willing to go, because that would feel unsafe and it would also be extremely ineffective care because nothing can really happen if people don't feel safe to be present. That's actually why I use a lot of pauses. I'll often slow things down in my sessions because that extra beat is really helpful for some people's brains. It gives extra time to process and digest. Another way I practice neuroaffirming care as a therapist and coach is that I don't expect everyone to use feelings language to describe how they're feeling. Because sometimes it can be hard to name a specific emotion, but you might feel like you're a balloon in the sky, or you might notice that there's a tension in your throat. And any of that is a perfectly valid description of your experience as long as it makes sense to you. It doesn't have to make sense to anyone else because it's your experience. As practitioners, I think part of our job is to really learn the language of each individual's nervous system and to reflect that language back to them, not force people to use our language. And using someone's language is a door that can open into safety and trust and actual deep healing and care that feels good to receive, rather than care that requires someone to mask in order to receive it. In closing here, I'm going to repeat the 5 pillars of neuroaffirming care. You might notice if one of these ideas is really resonating with you or really sticking out to you. So in no particular order, we understand that differences are not deficits. We acknowledge strengths and challenges. We do not sugarcoat, nor do we pathologize. We aim to support the whole person, not to fix them. And we acknowledge that the world was not built for all people, and we incorporate that understanding into the care that we provide. Finally, we move at the speed of your brain and nervous system. And whether you are neurodivergent or not, I think that neuroaffirming care is a really helpful concept because it gives us all a little more space to be more ourselves, more accepting, more curious toward difference, and also more creative and flexible in the care that we provide as practitioners or the care that we ask for and look for as clients, as patients. I think we can all really appreciate and benefit from care that makes our world feel bigger rather than smaller. And if you're ever interested in receiving some nervous system support and working with a neurodiversity-affirming therapist or coach, you are always welcome to check out my services and to reach out and book an intro call to work with me one-on-one. The links are in all of the show notes, and that is it for now. Thank you so much for listening to the Nervous System Care and Healing podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow or subscribe on whatever platform you use to listen to podcasts. And if you ever have a few minutes to leave a rating and review, it would mean so much to me, and it helps other people to find the podcast and spread the care. Please remember that this podcast is not a replacement for therapy, coaching, or professional mental health services. The information shared here is generalized, it may not reflect every individual nuance, and it should not be interpreted as personalized mental health advice. So please do seek out additional support if you need it. Take care and be well. This is Liz at Nervous System Care and Healing.